Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be welcoming you all to BSI's annual Net Zero Week and to kick off this exciting programme of events. As the national standards body representing the interests of UK industry on the global stage, BSI is at the forefront of helping accelerate change in the way we tackle our economic, social, and environmental challenges. Preventing the devastating impacts of climate change and achieving the target of reaching net zero by 2050 is the greatest challenge of our time. Our international team of experts work in every sector, sharing best practice, shaping standards, finding new ways to measure organisational progress towards net zero to ultimately help us all get to the heart of the issues surrounding our sustainability challenges. It is our mission to actively support you to achieve your sustainability goals, whether you're at the beginning of your sustainability journey or at a point where our support can help you progress to the next steps. Net Zero Week provides a unique platform to showcase the scope of the work being done across key sectors to meet global carbon emission targets. The series of engaging webinars taking place throughout the week will cover a range of key topics from sustainable finance to net zero in the food supply chain. And through these interactive sessions, we really aim to provide you with the expert knowledge and the latest industry updates to help you reduce carbon emissions and to help encourage you to join us in working towards the UK's ambitious net zero targets. To mark the start of this week, we're also very proud to share our Net Zero Barometer report for 2022. And it provides critical insights into how UK businesses are managing the transition to net zero. Now, based on the results from the survey of 1,000 UK senior decision makers and sustainability professionals, the report highlights that whilst almost half of the respondents are focused on business growth, only 20% are prioritising reducing carbon emissions. Given that time is of the essence, this highlights the extent of the challenge that we're facing. Now, that said, it's not all doom and gloom, and our annual survey also revealed a desire and an optimism, actually, from participants that the UK would achieve its net zero goal. And nearly 3/4 of those surveyed had already set targets to meet net zero. Post COP26, 78% of respondents were more convinced that reaching net zero targets is possible. For further insights into how industry leaders are paving the way for a sustainable future, the BSI Net Zero Barometer Report 2022 is available to access from the link in the Teams chat. Finally, I want to express my thanks to the organisers who've been working tirelessly to ensure the success of this year's Net Zero Week. Thank you to our inspiring speakers for giving up their time to share their insights with us. And thank you to all of you who have registered to participate in these sessions. It really is only through collaborative action that we can pave the way to a sustainable future. Thank you.
I'd like to tell you about a partnership we agreed last year with BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. It came about because we had a new energy management standard due to launch, aimed at small and medium-sized organisations to help them reduce energy consumption and therefore reduce carbon emissions. Now, there's a lot that any organisation can do to support their journey to net zero, but reducing energy usage is a key part of it. I asked BEIS if they'd like to partner with us on the launch of this new standard, knowing the standard would match their aims to support SMEs on their journey to reaching net zero. They were really enthusiastic, so I asked them if they'd like to sponsor some copies so that they could be offered for free download. They agreed they'd sponsor 100,000 copies of the standard. We created a special version of the standard and a guide to using it, and both are available for free download from our website. So if you'd like a copy of our phased approach to energy management standard and a free guide, please visit the website. The link is in the chat, but you can just Google BSI 50005 Energy Management. We have a webinar coming soon, so keep an eye out for that and come along and ask our experts any questions you'd like an answer to. Please do share the link with your members, colleagues and friends so they can see how their organisations can benefit from the standard.
Welcome everyone, and Thank you for joining today's session on net zero in the food sector. My name is Sarah Walton, and I'm the sector lead for agri-food here at BSI, looking at challenges for the food system and those closely involved in it from all sides, consumers, business, and policymakers alike. While net zero targets become ever more pressing for every country in the world, the food sector, which as we know is the largest manufacturing sector in the UK and the fourth largest in the world, has some very tough challenges ahead of it. The latest IPCC report noted the impacts of the food system on climate change, and there are real pressures from every side in the food sector, including challenges from the continued fallout from the pandemic, support for trade in the wake of EU exit, the impact of the rising cost of living, the crisis in the energy sector, and the war in Ukraine, of course, as well. All of these could seem to start to diminish the importance of net zero in the list of priorities for the food sector. But with a recommitment to net zero in the food sector as a whole, certainly following COP26, and good key targets for areas on such as food waste towards net zero for signatories to the Quartal commitment, the issue is still of vital importance to the sector and of course to the planet. Standards naturally exist to help support organisations to manage sustainability in their road to net zero, and you heard previously about some of that work in the energy area. So there are standards in biodiversity, climate change, environmental energy performance. And as the national standards body for the UK, BSI was both an instigator and a signatory to the London Declaration with other members of ISO, the International Standardization Organization, of which BSI is a member. And that declaration will enable an acceleration in government and industry tackling climate change and their transition to net zero. And it's a commitment to ensure that all global standards will support climate action and advance international initiatives to achieve our global climate goals. And it'll do this by considering key climate science in every new standard that's created, and also those that are coming up for systematic review. So one's been created before. Today, you're going to hear from our excellent panel of speakers from the Food and Drink Federation, from the Waste Resource Action Programme, the Environment Agency, and the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre, who will each be outlining different ways in which the food and drink sector can approach the challenge of net zero to help ensure a sustainable food system for the future. After each of them has spoken, we will have a panel discussion and a Q&A session, prompted by questions we've received before the webinar and also any questions coming in during the session, and I will aim to moderate that discussion and with the questions as best I can. Could I have the housekeeping slide, please, for a moment, just to Andrew? Thank you very much. This is just to give you a heads up that the webinar is listen only but is being recorded, so if you have to dip out for any reason, you can always pick up the recording at a later date and pick up something you may have missed. And as mentioned, please do put your questions into the Q&A function during the presentation, so that we can reflect on those during the session, the discussion session at the end. And now the first speaker I'd like to introduce you today is Emma Piercy. Emma is Head of Climate Change and Energy Policy at the Food and Drink Federation, and she's going to talk to you today about the FDF's support for food enterprises and finding ways towards meeting net zero targets. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much. So next slide, please. Great. So I shall cover a little bit of our net zero handbook, which we published at COP26. And then to have a look at sort of the net zero commitments across the farm to fork supply chain. And then a little bit of time around some of the challenges and trends that we're seeing and the work that we're doing across the supply chain in terms of this collaboration to overcome them. And next slide, please. So, you know, it's really interesting and very, very thought-provoking when we see the crisis in Ukraine and the war and the wider impacts this is happening. And you know, we see that, you know, even with, you know, energy, particularly today when we see sort of gas gas supplies into Poland, that the impacts on prices, on energy prices, is absolutely huge. And when we look at, the food sector, we see that the energy itself is embodied, at each point of the supply chain, which we, see in the top couple of graphs on this page. And, over this last year, but, post-COVID, but post the lockdowns, as economies started to recover, we had sort of, very increase in prices at that point, and now with Ukraine as well. But actually, this does bring to the fore some of the major challenges. And I introduced this slide because actually, when we talk about climate change and the impact that the food sector has on greenhouse gas emissions, it actually counts globally for about 26% of greenhouse gas emissions. In the UK, it's about 21%. And we see this, as per the bottom part of this graph, how that is made up at different points of the supply chain. With most, being within ingredients, about half of that footprint from UK ingredients, the rest from imports. But these other aspects too, right down to cooking in the home and the management of food waste. Next slide, please. So, in terms of then looking at how the food and drink sector can reduce its impact on CO2 emissions, but more significantly working towards that net zero ambition, COP26 we launched our handbook, which the front cover here, and you can download from our website. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this handbook is really about giving practical actions to manufacturers about the influence that they can bring to bear at each point of the supply chain. So when we've mentioned ingredients being about 66% of, on average, of emissions from food consumed in the UK. So from a manufacturing perspective, then it is looking, at your suppliers, and engaging with them on sort of the procurement strategies and working with suppliers to help reduce those emissions. So it's a very practical document, and likewise then going through. Obviously, there's for manufacturers, the manufacturing section and the scope 1 and 2 emissions. The sort of the on-site energy use. That's the only area where they have direct influence. So that we go into quite a bit of detail in there. But then, of course, in the other areas, so like customers and consumers, which we'll go on to shortly, and around the transport as well. We do find in manufacturing that a lot of transport is outsourced, but again, this handbook really helps manufacturers, particularly, I suppose, actually in food and drink SMEs. 96% of food and drink manufacturers are SMEs. Really, sort of practical advice on engaging with third parties. Next slide, please. So, it's interesting. When we look at net zero and within individual businesses and where the responsibility lies, we often think about there being a sustainability manager or an energy manager, but actually what I've just referred to, even there around sourcing of ingredients, procurement. And I think what this slide for me is a significant slide in the document. It really demonstrates that for all the different departments within an organisation, all have a link into working towards net zero. So this is something that we're seeing in terms of the efforts the sector is making, a real move towards upskilling, both in specifics in terms of on-site energy and that side of things, but more wider sustainability credentials and increasing sort of the carbon literacy that we have, for all employees and the roles that they play in their companies, because that collaboration aspect is obviously not just across on the farm to fork supply chain more broadly, but within businesses itself, between teams. Next slide, please. So I touched upon the ingredient slide. Now I've just included this here because it's just really to show that each chapter is really kind of structured in a similar way, and it is a very sort of, we try to make it a very user-friendly document. But we'll move over to the next slide, please. So this is interesting. Again, from the customers and consumers' perspective, what role that manufacturers can take in helping consumers, I suppose, make, should we say, adapt and change and develop, their retail behaviour. And I think, we do see, very much an increasing demand for vegan and plant-based diets. So manufacturers are responding to that. And then there was a phrase at COP26 that was said to me, and that is supply chains can only be pulled and not pushed. So demand does need to come from consumers, but at the same time, of course, manufacturers then have this responsibility to be able to make information available for those choices to be made. So one of the aspects here is that, we're working very closely with RAP on this, and RAP leading around, for example, supply chain emissions. Now, a colleague will talk more about that later, but this move towards an aligned industry approach on how we calculate supply chain emissions, how we calculate the carbon footprint, and subsequently, we need to think about, how we communicate that information. But working towards something that's consistent, for consumers is going to be critical, so that consumers can actually compare like with like, both in the same methodology and data sources. That's a key area, because what we're talking here in this section is around, that consumer behavioural change. Next slide, please. So this just provides an overview of the summary of actions that we have in each of those areas. So I shall let you digest that separately as such. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned COP26 a couple of times, and of course in the opening remarks as well. And I think what's really exciting for the food and drink supply chain is actually we've really all aligned to seeking to achieve net zero earlier than the 2050 timeframe, and to work towards 2040. And that's really important, because it really sort of seeks to demonstrate our commitment to making the changes, and as soon as possible, because that's the urgency that we now face. It is in progressing with those actions and not delaying. So we all came together at COP26 for a shared event, which I can go on to next, I think. So next slide, please. And this is I like this slide, because it does actually reflect the agenda from the event we had at COP26, but equally demonstrates some of the challenges and trends that we are facing. So from that first section around the international ingredients aspect, and this drive for sustainable sourcing, in looking at the next section around nature restoration and carbon offsetting, we have that need for an aligned industry approach on working out carbon footprinting. But more, I think actually the other thing I really want to say here is that when you look at the food system, and 66% of emissions come from ingredients, that to me really demonstrates both the impact that food systems has on the environment, but also our dependency on it. And with the government targets for nature restoration and biodiversity, the development of environmental markets is going to be a huge piece of work over these coming years, and I think particularly over next year we'll see a lot of development in that. So that's a big area to come. And then of course, then customers and consumers, the challenges we have as a society around sustainable healthy diets, dealing with food waste. around a third of food produced across the supply chain is wasted, but 70% of that is in the home. These are kind of things we need to really get on top of straight away, because that will make a huge difference, both from a cost of living perspective, but also the carbon perspective. Next slide, please. So just to touch upon the sort of work that we're doing together, sort of across the supply chain. So I've already mentioned the work RAF is doing. I'd like to talk about the Food and Drink Sector Council. So we have set up a net zero steering group within that, which basically is to sort of bring together those net zero plans from the NFU, the BRC, FDF, UK Hospitality, and work towards a combined one for the full supply chain, and then work on those common areas, challenges, and where there's scope for collaboration. So that, again, over the next few months, we'll see a lot of developments in that area. The IGD is doing some great work around environmental labelling, again, working towards that aligned industry approach. And already, sort of Cultivated is mentioned, and they have recently launched a set of 2030 targets, which will be really important for industry to consolidate around. I mentioned about environmental markets. The Financing UK Nature Coalition will be publishing a report soon around this, which will be really, really influential. And next slide, please. And that's it. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Emma. And now over to Sophie Harrison, who is a greenhouse gas sector specialist at WRAP and has been working on their guidance for Scope 3 emissions. Over to you, Sophie.
Right, thank you for that introduction. So I'm here representing WRAP, and I'm just going to start with a really top-line overview of who we are. So we are a sustainability charity, and our main focus areas are around food, textiles and plastics. We manage a series of voluntary agreements, and one of our flagship agreements is Cultivated 2030, which Emma mentioned earlier. So within Cultivated 2030, we have 3 distinct targets. So we want to reduce food waste by 50% by 2030 per person in the UK. We want 50% of fresh food to be sourced from areas with sustainable water management, again by 2030. And we want to see a 50% reduction in absolute greenhouse gas emissions associated with the production and consumption of food and drink in the UK. So of course, we can't do this alone, and we have our signatory base. So all our work is done in collaboration with over 100 organisations spanning across the whole value chain and all sectors within food and drink. So we go from retailers, hospitality and food sector, manufacturers, processors, farming and standards bodies, government departments, industry bodies and NGOs. So why WRAP got involved in this space is when we were scoping out a few years ago, we saw there was a gap around Scope 3 and how to tackle it. So from our research, we saw that most food and drink businesses had or were working on greenhouse gas targets, which did include their Scope 3 emissions, but they are now all facing the same challenge of how do we actually measure these emissions and how are we going to show our progress? Because there were so many different companies facing this same issue, there was a proliferation of different approaches, and there was real lack of consistency as to how this issue was being tackled. This also made it harder for suppliers in the supply chain to actually answer the requests that they were being bombarded with by all their customers, and just created this really uneven playing field and created a barrier to progress. So we saw lots of initiatives in this space, but not that forum that really convened different parts of the supply chain together to help the whole industry move forward faster. So that is the backstory of why we set up our Cultivated Supply Chain Scope 3 work programme. So just to summarise, we saw that there was a need for consistency of accounting and measurement, better information flows and more robust data. And we wanted to really make sure this didn't just push burdens up the supply chain, so it wasn't all landed on the producers to supply this data. So as Emma's already said, Scope 3 is really important in food and drink. So this is information put together by a business in the community. And you can see for the average food and drink manufacturer, Scope 3 makes up 95% of their footprint. And purchased goods, ingredients, again, as Emma was saying earlier, is 75% of the footprint. So it's a really significant part of the footprint and one of the harder parts to sort out this accounting for. Another issue with Scope 3 is that currently it relies a lot on average greenhouse gas emission factors. So a set of factors from various databases. And the published values, as you can see in this chart here, are very variable depending on where you get your emission factor from. And we heard from businesses that were finding it really hard to know if they were choosing the right emission factors and whether it's actually representative of their supply chain. And yeah, these databases weren't very black and white. And the biggest bit was that it's actually hard to understand progress over time with these emission factors because they're all historic and they're not frequently updated. So I'll get on to what we're doing about all of this. So there are global standards in place with some aspects in development. So you've got the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Corporate Value Chain, Scope 3 Accounting and Reporting Standards, and you've got the guidance from science-based targets around setting targets. And they're developing land sector removals guidance and forest land and agriculture guidance. So we have those guidance in place for the global market. But what we heard from our businesses who spoke to is that these are quite open to interpretation, and there are lots of questions raised about how do we get consistent definitions of measurement boundaries, how do we get consistent data source and validations, and how are we going to demonstrate progress. So what we did is we have pulled together the existing guidance and added onto it recommendations and requirements specific to food and drink. So we're aiming for these to serve as the measurement approach / rules for Scope 3 accounting for food and drink businesses. So what our protocols look like, and they'll be published in May, which is very exciting. And they're structured to mirror the steps of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Scope 3 standards. And as I was saying, summarised as the steps it takes, really practical action, those requirements and recommendations. So breaking down what is required by these global standards and just making it into actionable points for a company. So it's all in conformance with Greenhouse Gas Protocol and SBTi. We haven't reinvented the wheel in any way. We've just pulled it all together to get everything in one place and added that extra specificity for the food and drink business to get that consistency. We've also been working on an emission factor data sheet. So in this data sheet, we have pulled together, again, all the publicly available values into one place. So there's one data sheet for businesses to use. And in this data sheet, you can see a little sample of it here. But we made it really clear what geographic region this emission factor applies to, the production system, the functional units, which are, again, pieces that we heard were causing inconsistency and making it harder for companies to assess what is the right emission factor. We've also, which you can't see in the screenshot here, broken down exactly which emission factors include factors such as land use and change and packaging. And finally, we have this data quality score, which you can see slightly faded out here. And that's really focusing on the database themselves. So it's a lot around like the age and the methodology used. So just so you get a better idea of how accurate / recent your emission factor you're using is. This is very much a starting point and essentially a sticking plaster while we work to get that better data. But again, just driving that consistency in the short term. So we have a bit of a suite of documents going on, and the third set in the suite is a set of supplier questionnaires for key product types. So where we started our focus was with the top 10 UK imports. So you can see on the right here the products we have created these questionnaires for. And the aim was really to develop a simple set of questions / KPIs, and most important, ask your suppliers. We are having a lot of feedback from companies that they just didn't know where to start with how to engage their supply chain and what questions are the right questions. So we created these to be that starting point. And the questions in the surveys have been chosen either because they can have a catalyzing effect. So by asking the right questions, we can steer towards different certification and different data collection. So for example, with coffee, we asked if it's a Rainforest Alliance certified plantation from which they source. And also, so yeah, either they can have a catalyzing effect or they could inform Scope 3 accounting. So this is either through those actual product carbon footprint questions, which we put in there, or through the sort of approach that Better Cotton Initiative has taken, where we know that our product is using this preferable growing system. So how can we actually quantify that impact and put that positive impact into that emission factor? So looking at how to get data out the supply chain when there isn't that much data available. So doing this together is really valuable. It sends that message on that we want more consistency, and again, it's the power of everyone asking the same questions. So finally, after that whistle-stop tour, we're on to what are our next steps. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have drafts of all the documents I spoke about today on the RAP website on the 19th of May. So we've got the protocols, the emission factor data sheet, and those supplier surveys, and they'll be publicly available. And the next step after that is really the piloting phase. So we're going to take these suite of documents, use them in real life, and see how far we get with them, what needs to be changed, what isn't practical, and really to update those documents and make those practical case studies as well, so you have those examples to bring it to life. And yeah, as always, we'll be using the Quartile working group to steer further development of any support materials. And if you wanted to hear any more, because I appreciate this very whistle stop, there's an email there to get in contact with us. And I will hand back to Sarah.
Thanks very much, Sophie. And now over to Becca Tremaine, who's Senior Environmental Advisor in Regulatory Compliance at the Environment Agency. And she's going to tell us about an interesting research project for encouraging better environmental performance in the food and drink sector by potentially standardizing environmental metrics. Over to you, Becca.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so as Sarah said, I'm Becca Tremaine and I work for the Environment Agency within our Future Regulation Department, and have been leading on our Sea Beyond project, which I'm going to take you through today quite quickly, and my colleague Lily Jar will be joining us at the Q&A session. But to be a bit boring, I just have to start out with a few caveats and limitations about what I'm about to share with you today. And basically, it's just to say that this is research at this point and not really a firm commitment from the Environment Agency to start delivering this work. So yeah, a bit of a boring start, but kind of an important one. So we've been looking at a potential approach for beyond compliance, and we want to do this by looking at standardising environmental metrics that would help us to provide a level playing field for all food businesses to benchmark their environmental performance. And if we do this, have these metrics that align with the government's environmental goals, then we can help businesses to integrate economic, social and environmental benefits into their business, therefore by creating incentive for them to improve their performance. Now, you could kind of ask why we want people to go beyond compliance, but For those of you who don't know, the Environment Agency is England's environmental regulator, and as such, we regulate 14,000 environmental permits across waste and installations alone. Now, if you added water quality into that, then that number becomes far greater. And in that, we regulate approximately about 400 food and drink manufacturing sites. And then another number of sites in intensive farming also have permits with us. What we know of those 14,000 sites at the moment, that's approximately 97% of them are deemed broadly compliant with their environmental permit. But what we also know is that environmental performance, if you look at our Regulating for People, Environment and Growth report that comes out every year, that environmental performance with things like greenhouse gas emissions is actually plateauing. So we need to look at ways in which we can encourage and incentivise those that we regulate, and we have a really good opportunity to do that, to go beyond environmental compliance, to help us reach things such as net zero, UN SDGs, and the ambitious goals set out in DEFRA's 25-year environment plan. So as mentioned, we've been working on the See Beyond project, which has been funded by BEIS as part of the Regulators Pioneer Fund. The Environment Agency have led on it, along with Cambridge University, CEPA, Northern Ireland, BSI and RAP. And the reason that we bid for this, to look at the standardising environmental metrics, is that we'd previously done some work with the University of Cambridge a couple of years ago, and that when we spoke to industry, and this is broader than just food and drink, but about 75% of industry surveyed thought that there should be an additional environmental scheme that would help them go beyond compliance. So the Regulators Pioneer Fund and the See Beyond project has been a 6-month project looking at the standardisation of environmental metrics within the food and drink sector. The reason that we picked the food and drink sector, it's been a bit of a double-edged sword really. There's a lot of work going on in this area, which makes it really great, and a lot of appetite. However, because there's also a lot of work going on, it makes it a little bit trickier to kind of align. But we could also see that specifically in the food and drink sector, that there was an issue around communication when companies were going beyond compliance already, and being able to share the data that demonstrates that they're going beyond compliance with their customers and their supply chain, and that there was also kind of opportunity here for greenwashing. So yeah, standardising metrics would help seek to address some of those issues within the food and drink sector. So that's kind of why we chose to do this kind of 6-month project here. There's been 5 parts to the project where we are now complete, but those have been around understanding the needs of food businesses, on measuring and communicating environmental performance that goes beyond legal compliance, spending some time collecting the environmental metrics in the food and drink sector that are already out there, and then Cambridge University have developed those standardised environmental metrics for us, and then we've been working together to test the feasibility of the environmental metrics with food and drink businesses, and then a finalised report is just being done at the moment. So in terms of how we went about finding out the needs from food and drink businesses, we've done a number of workshops and also a survey, online survey, and what came back strongly is the sections in the middle are here where we see the benefits that they can see, but on the outside, the things that kind of preventing the food and drink sector kind of accessing some of those benefits of going beyond compliance. We had 101 survey respondents, and they were across from large businesses to SMEs. And across all of those, the biggest thing that came back for everybody was around data challenge, and that was about lacking accurate data for measuring environmental performance, that it's time consuming to collect data and to track environmental performance, and it's also costly to collect that data to report environmental performance. So again, we can see here that standardised metrics would help to address that data challenge, and it would also help to address some of the other challenges around unclear goals, and maybe some around lacking knowledge and skills and guidance, and if we can enable automation, maybe some around resource constraints as well. So we, as mentioned, we also looked at how we could collect those existing metrics and what was already out there and take that into consideration. So another piece of work that we did during this was to work with BSI to look at the landscape of standards within the food and drink sector. And that looked at standards within the UK, internationally and in Europe. It was across the food and drink supply chain, from agriculture right across to distribution, but also looking at cross-cutting kind of broader sustainability standards. So standards that wouldn't purely be unique to the food and drink sector. We identified, or BSI identified 400 initially, and we could break that down to 107 that were deemed to be linked directly to measuring environmental performance, and then another 50 that had that link to measuring environmental performance, but also around technical guidance as well. And I've put a bit of a long link on there, but there's more in-depth report there. You can go and have a look at some of the standards that are already out there, and yeah, play about with some of the data that BSI have put together for us. So that report's out there for people to look at. And then the other ways that we looked at collecting those existing metrics, where Cambridge undertook a literature review, and then also, you know, through the survey work that we've done in the workshops, we were asking industry what metrics they were already using. So when we were looking to create these standardized environmental metrics, we also worked with regulators and industry to create some assumptions that would help us define the metrics. And those are the 5 here. I'm aware that we've not got a huge amount of time, but I wanted to run through probably just the top one, which was the initial work that we've done was that market and moral forces often provide a greater incentive to improve environmental performance and regulation alone. So actually it should be a complementary technique. And assumption 5 is around environmental metrics should be chosen from high to low feasibility of implementation, and that's really helped us kind of guide where these metrics should be, which I will take us on to. So we can see here that industry identified that scope 1 and scope 2 were areas that they would find possible and quite easy to provide data on. And so these are included in the scope of our metrics that we've created, and also water usage. Animal welfare is another area that came up, but is slightly out of scope for us as a regulator, so that hasn't been included. But in addition to that, we've also included plastics waste, materials and food waste, as these were deemed by a large proportion of industry to be possible or easy for them to collect data on. Where we have found that things are slightly harder, and Sophie sort of alluded to this earlier, is around the supply chain. So areas that food and drink businesses identified as having goals in were around biodiversity, soil and forestation. However, it was too difficult. And again, for scope 3, so we want to have rigor and confidence around the data needed, certainly to start with. So we've had to rule those areas out. We do hope over time with collecting data on scope 1 and 2 emissions that would help kind of bring in scope 3. So how we've brought about those standardized environmental metrics are through the regulation and guidance that's already in existence, formal and informal standards that have been identified by BSI and by speaking to industry, the environmental metrics from the literature review, and then a business systems map. And that guiding around those principles that I've spoken about, and also some assumptions to make sure that the metrics would work, and that has helped us to create those standardized environmental metrics. So I'm going to steal Lily's analogy, but how these metrics are different, they're quite qualitative as well as quantitative and focus on continuous improvement. And Lily's analogy, which I'm going to steal here, is to describe this as a maze. Traditionally, some metrics have been used as to map out the maze and help industry get through it through different routes. But with this standardized set of environmental metrics, we aren't trying to do this. We're putting a tower in the middle of the maze to provide vision and direction to industry and give a greater viewpoint of how they may get there and help them learn along the way. So So in terms of our next steps, well, CBeyond was the first part or stage in building this tower of the maze, but actually we would need to field test these results, these metrics. As I said, the feasibility, we've tested the feasibility with industry, and the feedback was great, but a lot of people would want to actually test them in real life to see how they would work. So we need greater testing of these metrics, see how it works, and develop and share a data infrastructure to enable automation of data exchange. And potentially in the future, it could look at the EA having a platform, and we could look at how we could use AI learning. But that, I have to really stress, that's a real could and a potential, but that's kind of where we've got to. As I mentioned, we are finalising the report of this, which kind of goes into a lot more detail. Eventually that will be published on gov.uk, but we're hoping that others such as the FDF may host that into the interim. So that's a real whirlwind tour of the project, but yeah, I will hand it back over to Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becca. That there's you've managed to get in an awful lot there, I thought. So thanks very much for that. And now I'd like to ask Lindsey Dunbar, who's the Senior Business Engagement Manager at the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre, to talk about some of the ways in which agri-tech and biotechnology in the agri field can make a significant impact on net zero outcomes, particularly in the food chain. Over to you, Lindsey.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Sarah. So I am one of the Senior Business Engagement Managers at the iBioIC, and I lead on agri-tech, food, drink and anaerobic digestion portfolio within the organisation. So today I'm just going to talk around some innovations we're working on within the centre, and also some of our network is working on as well, that I thought might be quite interesting for today's audience. So firstly, I wasn't too sure how much the audience knows about biotechnology. And I think a lot of people hear the word biotechnology and they just think of white coats and life and chemical sciences, but it's a lot broader than that now. My definitions of biotechnology are the underpin a greener means of manufacturing chemicals and consumer goods, pharmaceuticals, including vaccines and antibiotics. And that's probably the more traditional thought process of biotechnology and what most people associate it with. But it also is a means of turning waste materials into high value products through innovative processes and using sustainable raw materials, and that will help reduce carbon footprint of manufacturing processes as well. And it's also the means to create new products and processes that the market didn't have before, and going beyond the more traditional manufacturing to make things greener. So as I alluded to, it's a bit more than just life and chemical sciences, and we work with a whole range of different sectors at the Innovation Centre. And the ones that are of particular interest today are, we've got a lot of projects working on meat alternatives that I'll talk a little bit around later. Also with the beverages industry, particularly in Scotland, we've got a lot of whisky co-products, so working on that. Also in waste management, bioplastics and sustainable packaging as well is another big one. And food and food additives as well. So it's a lot broader than a lot of people maybe initially thought for biotech. And there's a lot of drivers for innovation in this space at the moment. So as well as the net zero targets that we've talked a lot around today, there's also the Scottish Government has set a target for zero biodegradable waste to be going to landfill by 2025, and that's really having an effect on how people are dealing particularly with food waste, but other types of biodegradable waste as well. And we've noticed that there's a lot of large multinational companies that are following suit, and they're developing their own sustainability targets. So a lot of the distilleries are doing that, but then also the likes of, say, Unilever, they've committed to having no fossil-derived feedstocks going into any of their cleaning products by 2030. So that's having quite a big impact on supply chain as well. And then just generally the growth of the global population, and there's a need for innovative solutions to feed the world. And then there's more pressure on farming because of this, and this is having an impact on agriculture and how we're moving away from traditional methods of growing food as well. And then finally, public perception. So it's having quite a big impact because many consumers are trying to be more responsible and they have an interest in their own carbon footprint. So again, this is having quite a big impact on the food supply chain. So I want to talk a little bit around the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre, what it is we do. So we are a publicly funded organisation, and we're funded by the Scottish Funding Council, Scottish Enterprise and the Highlands and Islands Enterprise. And we're set up as a networking support organisation in 2014, and we're really here to help grow the biotechnology sector and the wider bioeconomy as well. And we provide support to ease the innovation journeys of companies of all different sizes. So we work with companies who are brand new spin-outs from academia and small SMEs up to large multinational companies. And we bring together industry, academia and government and help companies get their products into global markets. So we're very driven by the National Plan for Industrial Biotechnology, and it was developed in 2012, and it set a target of having a £900 million turnover and 200 companies active in industrial biotechnology in Scotland by 2025. In 2012, there was only a turnover of 189 million and only 24 companies working in that space. And we feel at the Innovation Centre we've been quite a driver in helping to achieve the number of companies that are active in industrial biotechnology, but also the turnover as well. And in our last count up, we had over 130 companies active and a turnover around about 750 million as well. And we're doing an update of the national plan that we're launching at our upcoming conference in June, on the 6th and 7th of June, that'll have updated figures. And again, it just shows the growth towards more companies being active in the biotechnology space and also the turnover associated with that. So as I mentioned, we're a networking organisation, and it says 130 here. I think we're now at 141 member companies, and most of which are really innovative SMEs and micro companies. And we've funded over 100 collaborative research projects, and we've directly supported 60 companies in their growth. We also welcomed our 100th PhD student, and I'll talk a little bit more around what it is we have to offer in our skills programme as well. And we launched our MSc in Industrial Biotechnology and also a new HND programme in Industrial Biotechnology with some of the further education colleges in Scotland. And we've also leveraged over 17 million towards building Scotland's bioeconomy. So this is what we have to offer companies that engage with the Industrial Biotechnology and Innovation Centre. We have funding, so we've got funding available where we can directly fund projects, and we can help by supporting really early stage. We've got spin-out funding, also some feasibility funding, then we've got larger scale innovation funding as well. And we've also recently introduced some funding where companies can come in and gain access to some equipment and equipment centres as well. And we're quite unique in that we have two open access facilities called Flex Bio and Rapid Bio, where we can help companies scale up in their innovation journey. And they're based at Strathclyde University and Heriot-Watt University. And through that, you get the knowledge of our technical team and all of our technical expertise, and you can get advice as well on your project. We're also a networking organisation, as I've mentioned, so we do a lot of conferences. We've got our upcoming annual conference coming on in June, but we also do member-only events, and we do a lot of outreach webinars to do a bit of awareness raising as well. So a lot of work in that space. And as I mentioned previously, we've got a few skills programmes, so they range from HND level all the way up to PhD level. And we also offer continuous process development within house for companies as well, who are looking to maybe move from traditional sectors, say chemicals, into more biotechnology. We can offer that too. So I wanted to talk a little bit around some of the companies in our network, the projects they're working on, and also some projects we've been involved in the Innovation Centre. So we've been working with, these are companies within our network who are deriving value from food and drink production waste. The first one is Argent Energy, and Argent, they take waste oil and fats and they manufacture biodiesel from that. And they manufacture at quite a large scale now, and they're producing around about 145 million litres of biodiesel per year from these waste fats and oils. And we also work with a company called Revive Eco, and they offer a waste collection service for coffee grounds. And from the coffee grounds, they extract natural oils. And this can be used across quite a wide range of industries, including cosmetics, food and drink, and pharmaceuticals as well. jump too far there. We've also got companies working on novel ingredients. So for example, Scott Bio, they grow microalgae under quite a controlled environment, and it's a type of microalgae called phytocyanin. And from that, it produces quite a nice blue pigment in this microalgae. And from that blue pigment, they can extract it. And it can be used for quite a wide range of applications. One of them is serving the food and drink sector. And a good example of this is they partnered with a gin brand called Firkin Gin, and they made Firkin Blue Gin, which I think has been quite a hit since it came out. And we've also got a company called MyAlgae. And I'll talk a little bit more about a project we're doing with MyAlgae as well. And they take pot oil from whiskey co-products, and they extract omega-3 oils from the algae that feed off of the pot oil to produce salmon feed. We've also got quite a lot of companies working on alternative sources of protein. So here's just a couple of examples here. We've got Enough, who have developed a novel process which utilises wastewater from bioethanol plants, and they use that to ferment fungi and produce mycoprotein, which is a sustainable source of protein, and quite similar to corn. And then we've also got Horizon Proteins, who utilise distillery co-products, primarily pot oil, and they extract the protein fraction from that, and they manufacture salmon feed. And then we're working with Intelligent Growth Solutions as well on vertical farming. So vertical farming offers a solution where crops can be grown in a facility with quite a small footprint, reducing the pressure on land use. And this technology means that the environment can be really tightly controlled, and that includes things like lighting, watering, CO2 levels and nutrient delivery, and it can really enhance how much waste is reduced when using vertical farming versus traditional farming methods. Sustainable packaging is another one that we work quite a lot on, and we've got a company called Coantech, and they reduce both food and plastic waste at the same time by utilising langoustine waste. And from the langoustine waste, they extract a component called chitin, and they produce sustainable packaging from that chitin. And then we've got a company called Cellucomp, who take nanocellulose fibres extracted from root vegetables, so for example carrots, and they produce this novel material called curran. And curran can be used for quite a wide range of applications. One of these applications is anti-biofilm packaging. So I did mention already we've got quite a lot of distilleries in Scotland, as you'll probably know. So we've got quite a lot of whiskey co-products that are produced, including draft, pot ale, carbon dioxide. There's spent lees as well, but we don't work so much in the spent lees area. But many distilleries either have anaerobic digestion facilities on site, or they maybe send their co-products for processing at an external AD plant, or some of them are still actually putting it into landfill at the moment. So, but there are more novel uses for whiskey co-products, and ourselves at the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre is working in partnership with Zero Waste Scotland, the Scottish Whisky Research Institute, and 3 of our member companies to valorise whiskey co-products into higher value products. So the project's called the Valorisation of Whisky Co-products. And currently most companies in the biotechnology space who are utilising whisky co-products as a feedstock extract only one component, so for example protein, carbohydrate, and the rest is considered a waste stream to them. And we noticed that we have member companies who have an interest in these different components, and the rationale behind this project was to identify some potential synergies between the technologies, and whether it's possible to extract multiple components from one feedstock that can be used across different technologies. So that results in the production of multiple end products, but also reducing the amount of waste that's created as well. So for this project, we identified some potentially complementary technologies from companies within our network. So Horizon Proteins and MyAlgae I've mentioned already, but also biopower technologies. So Horizon, as I said before, they extract the protein from pot oil to produce fish feed. MyAlgae also interested in pot oil, and they utilise the carbohydrate fraction for algal growth, and they extract the omega-3 again to go into fish feed. And biopower technology, they mill draft that burns quite efficiently as a gas. And some of the material they have is too large and doesn't pass quality control. So this material could potentially be used to enhance both the Horizon Proteins or the MyAlgae process. So this project's ongoing and it's due to be completed this summer. It says July 2022, but I think it shall be June it'll be finished, and we're going to launch the findings of the report at a fringe event for our conference. And so this fringe event is taking place on the 6th of June. And I just want to talk finally just on the kind of future of food and drink and where we've seen in the biotechnology space innovations coming and a lot of projects in this area. So meat alternatives is quite a big one, and it's one we've had a lot of recently. So that includes plant-based, fermented or cultured products. And there's about 1,200 different brands of alternative proteins. And it's estimated the market for meat alternatives could be over £100 billion in the next decade. So about 10% or so of the global meat industry. And the industry in 2020 raised 3.1 billion. So it really is growing at some pace. In particular, we've got a lot of companies that have been working on cultivated meat. And cultivated meat, for anyone who's maybe not come across that term before, is where genuine animal meat is produced by cultivating the animal cells directly within a lab. So the cells grown in oxygen-rich bioreactors in high densities, and the volumes are given nutrients. And several companies have pilot scale facilities. And I think the only, as far as I'm aware, approved sale of the first cultivated meat product has been in Singapore, and that was in December 2020. And I really do see it as a trend moving forward, and we do have quite a lot of companies working in this space. And I think it could really provide a low carbon option for environmentally conscious consumers. Another innovation that we've seen as well is a trend for vegan leathers that are made from fruit and vegetable waste. One example is a company called Frumat Leather. They're based in Italy, I believe, and they take apple pomace after the juice has been extracted to create a leather-like material. And this can be used for quite a wide range of applications, from fabrics, footwears, furnishings, and even paper. And you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be apple. There's other feedstocks that we use: pineapple leaf, bark, leaves, mushrooms, grape, fish skins. So really is quite a lot of possibilities there, and we've seen companies using all these different feedstocks as well. And again, this is predicted to grow at quite a fast scale, and the predicted market value by 2025 is about $90 billion globally. And I just wanted to finish off today by talking around one of our projects called the Bioeconomy Cluster Builder project. And this is a 3-year ERDF funded collaborative project between ourselves, KTN Innovate UK and Scottish Enterprise. And the purpose of the project is to raise awareness of the benefits and applications of industrial biotechnology, but also to connect people and resources and develop new and exciting value chains, and also to talk a little bit around how we can green existing value chains as well. And it also encourages the utilisation of Scotland's bioresources. In Scotland, we've mapped bioresource availability, and this is available through our website in the iBioIC website. And we've mapped the biohorizons, and we're just about to refresh that, and Zero Waste Scotland have been leading on that, and that's due to be launched this summer, I believe, an updated bioresource mapping tool. And we also run targeted workshops and awareness raising activities. So we do quite a lot of webinars in this space. And, you know, it's something we're very interested in is working more in food and drink. And we've got a fringe event that I mentioned previously coming up at the conference. It's going to talk a lot around the Whiskey Co-product project, but also on alternative proteins as well. And we can also help provide innovation support for companies, and we also signpost SMEs to funding opportunities. We have our own funding opportunities, but we also work quite collaboratively with KTN Innovate UK and the enterprise agencies in this space. So if this is a project that you think could benefit your business, then please do reach out. We'd be more than happy to talk around how we can support you, and maybe even some events that might be of interest as well. So thank you very much for your time today. If you get any questions following on from my presentation, I've included my email there, and I will pass back over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsey. That's fascinating, and thanks to all our speakers for some fascinating insights there, which I think will give us a very good place to start our discussion. If I could ask all of you to put your cameras on now, including Lily Zhao, who's going to join us for the discussion, I believe. Lily's the Senior Research Associate and lead for the Incentivising Sustainability programme at the University of Cambridge. I'm not sure if she's there with us, but yes, there she is. Hello, Lily. First of all, I'd like to kick off with a question for Emma. How would you say, sort of going back to what you were talking about earlier, how would you say the cost of living pressures are impacting how manufacturers are currently responding to net zero challenges?
Well, to be honest, I think I'd actually broaden that out, because, you know, when we look at the pressures that manufacturers are facing in terms of costs or you know, running their businesses, of course, the consumer angle and the prices people pay in the supermarkets, but we're also looking at energy prices and the impacts on the manufacturing operations, you know, fuel prices, you know, around transport. And we're also looking at, you know, impacts around ingredients and, you know, the cost of ingredients that feed into the manufacturing process. You know, looking, you know, for example, you know, right now with the Ukraine war, around, you know, sunflower and wheat, for example, and the impact that then has on the agricultural side as well. So, you know, thinking like fertilizers and you know feed for livestock. So we see a huge number of cost pressures and other pressures that manufacturers are facing, which you know, a lot of it's coming down to cost and availability. So I think bringing that to sort of the net zero and how it's impacting net zero. Well, I'm actually, in this context of net zero, I actually think it has a positive effect, in the sense of what's most important is that the first rule, also when we look at energy, is efficiency. So you're making, you know, trying to input and put in place sort of many more efficiency improvements as possible, and reducing waste in the system. So, you know, one example of that, I suppose, looking specifically at energy, you know, if we can move away from fossil fuels and the context you see gas prices and the reliance across Europe, that feeds into global gas prices around Russian gas, we can move away from that and move towards renewables. That helps companies and consumers, you know, to you know, have more of a steady price, you know, less volatility. And that's what we want to see for addressing climate change and net zero. So, you know, I think it's an incredibly difficult time, but a bit like as we came through, you know, from COVID, and we're talking about a green recovery, actually maybe, you know, the crisis that we're now seeing is adding to that and adding to those drivers.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There are many different factors here, aren't there, that to take into account. So it's a complex picture for the whole industry. A question quickly for Sophie. We had a question before the webinar about how to shift the focus in the food industry from Scope 1 and 2 emissions to Scope 3 emissions, which I hope that your presentation has helped to answer quite clearly today. But I wondered if perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the Scope 3 emissions guidance and how it's intended to help with this focus on the supply chain. We had other questions previously about the need to really bolster net zero initiatives for the supply chain. So I just wondered if you had anything more to say on that point.
Yeah, I think that actually in the supply chain there is already quite a large focus on the Scope 3 area. Like, we are being approached about it rather than having to approach people. So definitely there's already that awareness there, and where this guidance will come in, hopefully will just lower that barrier to entry and then allow more people to step into this space, make it a bit less confusing. But yeah, there is already that interest there, and that wants to get to net zero is already there. So it's more about lowering those barriers to entry to get people involved.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a very comprehensive thought on that. I wonder, open question to all of you, in fact, what are your further thoughts about support for integrating greater sustainability in the movement of food and food products globally in the supply chain?
Well, I mean, I think again, it's coming to the fore, some of these issues again with the Ukraine crisis and looking at alternative oils. And, you know, we've got recent consultations, you know, around due diligence and forest risk commodities. These are all things that are really at the forefront, because actually what we're all kind of wanting is to really to develop a, you know, resilient, you know, secure, you know, food system. And we have a resilient food system right now, but we need to maintain that and build on that, you know, in the future in the context of climate change. So you know, no, I think there's some really good and momentum building here, which yeah, I think we can feel very positive about.
And anyone else have any other thoughts on that, or should we move on to other questions? I've got plenty of questions. So there's a question here, and a couple of questions actually, which probably should be aimed first at Lindsey. She's spoken about those biotech solutions. First of all, there was a question that just came in about whether Bioeconomy supports only Scottish organisations, or whether, so I'll just ask that question now because that one, I can see it on the top of the list here. So
No. In short, the answer is no. No, we have members that are all across the UK, and we've got a few international members as well. So there is certain support mechanisms that, due to the type of funding we have, can only go to Scotland, but you know, it doesn't exclude people from a lot of the support that I talked around. So if you are based down south, or you know, if you are based elsewhere in the UK or even internationally, then please do get in touch. We can see how we can help you.
We were hearing from you that there are sort of many ways to impact the food system more sustainably by using more innovative technology, methods, products. Not, for example, just the establishment of vertical farming, but which there's been some skepticism in some of the questions that we've been receiving. And how would you respond to that sort of skepticism about the ingredients in products like cultivated meat, for example, or the use of biotechnology? In fact, what would you say what do we have to do to really sort of, you know, enhance the credibility, ensure reassurance of the consumers in alternatives?
Yeah, I think there's always that hesitancy when it's novel technology, it's new technology, and we see that a lot. And I think it's a lot around awareness raising. So, you know, coming to events like this, the events that we hold as well, you know, being at the forefront of this technology is available for the food supply chain, manufacturers just becoming aware of it. And I also think as well, government support and legislation will be really important, and standards as well. Sarah, of course, that's your bag. You know, for things like cultivated meat are going to be very critical moving forward. And I also think as well, there's horses for courses, so to speak. Vertical farms, I think, have their place when you're looking at, say, you know, a built-up area that doesn't have much land availability. You know, in urban areas, then that's kind of where you would see vertical farming fitting in. But I think the bioresource mapping tool that I touched on earlier is really useful because it's broken down by region, and you can see what biorisings and what food waste is coming out, what agricultural waste is coming out. And then I think it's just really important pulling all the pieces of the jigsaw together. So seeing that, you know, for example, in Fife, there's a whole load of, say, carrot waste. What can we do with that carrot waste? Putting the people who have that waste in touch with innovators so that we can actually really achieve net zero. Because if we don't think of it that way, then it's never going to happen. In Scotland, we've set it for 2045, and I think that's quite a target to set. So I think it's just going to be really important moving forward to make sure that you're engaging all parts of the supply chain.
Thanks, Lily. Thanks, Lindsey. I have Lily on my mind at the moment because I wanted to ask a question of Becca and Lily about the environmental management performance, although perhaps not precisely in the area of food and drink that you've been examining, but this is about food waste in the event hospitality industry. I don't know if you covered much of that in your project, but there was a questioner that was noting that there was a large amount of surplus food that gets discarded in that industry, and in fact this might be something for Sophie as well. Part of it can be donated, but not everything is suitable to donate. It's hard to match customers' expectation, sustainability and food safety at the same time. And so the questioner was asking what suggestions the panel might have around that waste and surplus issue, and what might be, what might help to incentivize.
Yeah, I think that's so for the pre-packed food, and it's quite similar to manufactured food, the methodology, because it has been pre-packed, and so then it's about understanding what kind of maybe to manage this kind of demand management issue. So understand how they can predict the demand in a better way. So that's one of the potential solutions. And so if we talk about, for example, like restaurants and events, and the issue I think is there are more potentials is to understand, for example, how they design the menu, the portion size, and how they can, for example, in some of the restaurants, usually they provide a bigger portion because so probably it's easier to charge a bit higher price in that way, and they want to increase the sales. And but at the same time, and actually, if you calculate the calorie, and also you look at how the nutrients actually is not exactly what people need. And so from that direction, so it's about how to align the healthy eating and also sustainable diets together in a way that they can really reduce the not just the food waste, as actually they're also nutrients. So it's to look closer and in a granular level, there are more potentials here, and that can reduce food waste and also increase profit for restaurants.
Emma wants to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the manufacturing sort of side of things and surplus that we see in retailers, the redistribution of that is, of course, then the primary angle to take, once you're in that position where you've got food surplus and waste. And so, organisations, like Company Shop, for example, have a big role to play in that, but also, charity distributions. There are going to be different solutions for different areas and the scale of what we see. But of course, there can also be, challenges, whether it's mistakes or issues with some labelling or something didn't go quite right in a particular production of X good. Instead of going to waste, these can now have a channel through to consumers and actually help to tackle some of the cost of food for communities in real need. And I think the other thing that I think we'll need to think about more going forward is around best before and use by dates. We've seen a couple of examples recently in the last few months, like with Morrison's and milk, and I think Co-op in the last week with their yogurts, and changing those from use by to best before. That's really interesting. But also, I think we have a big responsibility here of engaging with consumers and the understanding of what best before means. So after the best before date, it's still good, healthy, good to eat. Shouldn't be thrown in the bin. But there's a lot of misunderstanding. So there's quite a bit of work to do. And given that 70% of food waste happens in the home, there's a lot to do in that area.
Yes, and in fact, one of the sorry, Sophie, I'll come to you in a second. I noticed one of the questions that came in was, somebody wanted to hear more about the labelling issue that IGD, the Institute of Grocery and Distribution, are working on. So we don't have much of that at the moment, but that would be something. I don't know if any of you would be able to follow up at all with that. I know it was something that you mentioned.
Well, what I would say, I'll plug one of our events. 18th of May at Food and Drink Federation. We're having our first sustainability networking breakfast, and we have the head of sustainability from the IGD coming to talk a bit about that, so you can meet the lady in person yourself.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll note that one down for myself too. Sorry, Sophie, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add a signpost onto the end of that question. Colleagues in the hospitality and food sector team have developed a suite of resources specifically tailored to tackle food waste in these kind of situations with the Gardens and Grub initiative. So there's a lot of handy tips, hints, and how to actually get started and how to navigate these issues in those resources.
Thank you. And I might just also note here that we're soon to be revising the standard ISO 2012-1, which is a sustainable event standard, which was originally based on work that we did with BSI did on the Olympics in 2012, and was then developed into an international standard. That will be revised, taking more of the issues around climate and net zero into account. Soon, I think that should start. So Becca and Lily, back to you. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about standardization of metrics for environmental performance. At the moment, you know, it's a research project. I noticed that you talked, Becca, about the testing it out and what's good. Do you have plans for what might come next and what that would look like?
We are seeking more funding to try and take that forward. We would very much like to be able to test those metrics. As I say, we've done the feasibility testing with industry, and it was predominantly positive feedback, but that some feedback was that they would like to be able to test out that in real time. For us as a regulator, we would want to have quite a lengthy period of testing to assure that we are collecting the right kind of data. So really for us it is about being able to do that testing, looking at how we might be able to create platforms and continue that kind of collaboration work with the partners that we've been working with, and really looking for opportunities to take that forward. So it's a case of watch this space, but we're hoping that we will be able to keep pushing forward with the work.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I've just had a note passed to me, by the way, about that 2012 one. It's currently out for review, so there isn't a decision yet on actually revising it. We're still waiting we're currently seeking the views of all UK stakeholders on that. So just to put that out there for the people on the call, if you have a view on what needs to be in that in that standard, then please do get in touch with us. Lindsey, I wondered if you could tell us if there's a particular area of biotech where you can see exciting advances being made or soon to be made in impacts of the net zero targets on the food chain. I know you did actually mention a couple of things there, and just thought maybe we might have a thing top of mind that's burning that you might want to talk about.
Oh, it's a tricky one because I think there's a lot of really exciting advances, but I suppose the one that I think is the biggest and is probably going to make the most impact on net zero targets is alternative proteins. It's a huge one at the moment. We've got a lot of companies working in that space. I touched on it in my presentation. We've got companies who are taking what is considered waste or a co-product, and they're turning it into things like mycoprotein. We've got that element. We've also got, I didn't touch on this at all, but we've got a lot of companies working in insect protein as well. And again, that's a big one. But I know they're having, I should maybe have a separate conversation with you, Sarah, because I know issues around standards in that in the insect protein. And then of course cultivated meat is another big one. So yeah, there's a lot going on in this area. Another one that I haven't mentioned is seaweed as well as an alternative source of protein. I know that Sam's up in Oban is doing a lot of work on that. So I would say that's probably the biggest one. And another one as well, and it's less in the food supply chain, but still very relevant to the food sector, is alternative packaging. I think it's a really important one moving forwards as well, given the amount of plastic that goes to waste, and the challenges as well with specific plastics, trying to break it down. There's different types of plastics. You can manufacture plastic from a sustainable source, but it's no more biodegradable than any other fossil derived plastic. And then there's plastics that are truly biodegradable and can be broken down by bugs or are easily broken down. So there's differences there, and I think that's a really important one moving forward for net zero. I would say there's advances in the space, but it's still in its infancy, and a lot of work still needs to be done in that area.
Thanks very much. Yes, we've been looking at we've been talking with innovators about the cultivated meat industry and stakeholders about that as well. We did a couple of roundtables recently. And we're hoping to put out a paper about it, a discussion paper for further, to gather further further conversation and discussion about it. For all of you, so I see we've about six minutes left in the session. If you were to pick your top priorities for action to help reduce greenhouse gases or provide a most effective impact to achieving net zero in the food system, what single thing, I know it's a really ridiculous question, I know, because it's a complex situation, but you can think what would be your ideal? So I can go to, who hasn't spoken for a while? Emma. You put your hand up.
It's a quick answer for me, and that's food waste, because it's the food waste it produces wasted, and that accounts for 9 to 10% of emissions. By addressing food waste and raising its profile, as we do with energy and energy efficiency, that will really help the pockets, the cost of living agenda, and help reduce carbon emissions. So for me, that's the first priority for here and now.
Thanks very much. And Sophie, you'd probably say the same thing.
Yeah, because food waste was taken. I'm probably more, yeah, I would say that actually consistency. Yeah, food waste is the top one, but then yeah, again, consistency, moving forward together in the same direction will be a significant impact in this area as well.
Yeah, and in fact, the food waste issue is very much reflected in standardization at the moment in ISO. There is a new committee on food loss and surplus, which recently began work, and we have obviously we have a UK committee with RAP, the chairmanship actually leading on that. So if anybody on the call is interested in getting involved in that work or has relevant experience, please do get in touch with us. We want to put as many UK stakeholder views forward as possible into that work. Sorry, so going down the list here, so Becca, what would your first thing be, the priority?
I mean, I would mirror what Emma and Sophie said about food waste, but I think also is around that automation of data and being able to demonstrate what they're doing, and that was for our work, that's been the biggest barrier for people being able to improve their environmental performance. So yeah, but looking at that data automation and the exchange.
Lily?
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, all of these important issues, and I think in general probably we need enabling technologies like automating data exchange, like the collaboration platform that enable the collaboration along the supply chain, and also between consumers and producers, and to enable the eco-labeling that can be more transparent. So technologies like this, and I call them enabling technologies. And currently, more investment is on this individual innovation, and we haven't looked too much about the social innovation. That's how it can allow us to transform to net zero.
Thank you. Yes, I think the social part of it is very much is very important as well. And finally, Lindsey.
Yeah, so I suppose we're talking a lot around food waste being the main one. We hate the word waste in biotechnology. What is nothing to one man is gold to another. So you can take what is food waste, and that's actually a really key feedstock for a lot of the biotech processes that we use. So for example, I talked around one of our companies is taking root vegetable waste and they're turning it into something that can be used across a wide range of technologies, including packaging and again langoustine waste that can be used again for packaging solutions. So if I think what would be really beneficial moving forward, and I know it kind of touched on what Becca was saying with regards to data and working in the data space, is something like a materials marketplace where it brings together the availability of food waste, and then linking that in with a biotech company who could utilize that waste and make it into a high value product, so that it really is becoming a circular economy, and it's completely cutting out any sort of waste that's going to landfill. It's going to lower value things such as say anaerobic digestion, energy production. So making sure that we can squeeze every last bit of value out of something before it goes to something like anaerobic digestion.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds, that would be a really brilliant intervention, I think. Thanks to everybody who's put forward questions today. I hope we managed to cover off most of those. And finally, I think it's just left to me to thank the speakers today, our excellent panel, and to all of you to taking part in the session, and also to the BSI events team who supported us and helped run the event today. I'd just like to mention again some of the existing standards that could provide support solutions that industry and policymakers might be seeking to put in place. We can certainly let you know more about those, and I know that there's a discount available for a pack which will come up now, Net Zero Solution Pack. If you're interested in some of those, there are standards, of course, around carbon neutrality, energy management, climate adaptation, as I mentioned earlier. There's also the Industrial Biotechnology Roadmap Report, which was produced in conjunction with the IBIC and the Industrial Biotechnology Leadership Forum and Innovate UK, which has a lot of interesting discussion on prioritisation of recommended actions in this innovative space. So you may want to, you can link to that for free on BSI website. We can provide you with a link to that. We're very keen at BSI to convene and facilitate discussion, especially where standards and good practice existing or yet to be defined can play a positive role for the food sector and its stakeholders. And if anyone would like any further information on BSI's commitment to world supporting organisation in net zero ambitions and targets, please do get in touch. Otherwise, thank you very much again and goodbye.